nos vai levar também em termos tecnológicos. Muito bem, posto isto, vamos avançar e estamos a 2 dias de começar o Campeonato do Mundo de Futebol. Um Campeonato do Mundo que é forçosamente diferente, desde logo a partir do momento em que ocorre numa data completamente diferente, a meio de uma época das ligas nacionais, e portanto é importante também debatermos a questão dos calendários, ainda mais tendo em conta também este pormenor do Campeonato do Mundo este ano, que ajuda aqui enfim, a enriquecer esta discussão que vamos agora ter sobre a evolução dos calendários desportivos e o impacto no futebol profissional. Vamos fazer a transição de painéis, vamos olhar para novas competições e perceber também, de alguma forma, como é que isto acaba por ter influência. E aqui estão os próximos oradores. Vai juntar-se a nós, à distância, Ahmed Abbasi, que é diretor executivo de competições e desenvolvimento do futebol. Connosco está o Alberto Colombo, que é secretário-geral adjunto da European Leagues. Também o Alexander Bielefeld, que é diretor de relações estratégicas da FIFPro. E ainda o Javier Morente, que é diretor das relações com associações desportivas internacionais da LaLiga. O nosso moderador que nos vai guiar nesta conversa é o Jon Prada, para de alguma forma percebermos também este caminho da evolução dos calendários desportivos e o impacto no futebol profissional e, tal como dizia há pouco, também com todo esse impacto que vamos ter com a novidade de um Campeonato do Mundo de Futebol jogado em novembro e dezembro. Mais uma vez, aproveitem, desfrutem, vamos a isso.
Hello. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. In this panel, we are going to speak about the development of the calendars and the impact in the professional football clubs and players. First of all, I think that there is a good time to speak about the football calendar because the World Cup in Qatar is going to start on Sunday and it's going to be the first World Cup in autumn. So it has changed all the calendar, and this change has a big impact in all of the players, clubs, leagues, federation. So to speak about that, we have 4 people about all the areas of football. And here with me, first of all, we are going to speak with Alexander Bielefeld. He is the Director of Global Policy and Strategic Relationship of FIFPro. So Alexander is going to explain us mostly what is the impact for the players of the calendar. Because, for example, last year Liverpool played 63 games. So the impact of the calendar, of the more games, it's very busy, no? It's very big.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, everyone. Thank you for the invitation also to the Portuguese League. Look, we have the privilege as FIFPro to actually represent the player unions who represent professional players, male and female, on both on the top level of the game, but also across, obviously, all the different and various professional competitions we run across the globe. Now, when we look at the calendar, I think it's fair to say that so far when we constructed the calendar, we always looked at it from a competition perspective and from an economic and broadcast perspective. We haven't necessarily built a calendar which is thought through the lens of the player in terms of performance, in terms of recovery, and actually how can we develop and create a playing environment which really serves the player in the first place and therefore also the product. So when we look at the current calendar, basically, right, I think it's important to state that we have both overload quite excessively at the top end of the game, and at the same time we have a lot of professional players who actually do not play enough matches. So that's what we usually would define as underload. Now, it's clear that from a player perspective, they want to play every match, right, all the time. And the DNA of the players is also that when you come up as an athlete, you will never actually say that you don't want to play or that you're playing enough. it's just not the environment in the locker room towards the coach, thinking about the next contract, where you would admit that you reach a physical limit. Understanding that, I think it's really important that when we look at comments made by players in the media or when we talk to players in the locker room, that actually we have a lot of players who actually also talk publicly about the excessive workload, right? And the fact that players do that means that there's a lot of pressure on them actually to do so. Now, when we talk about overload of players and specifically excessive overload, then I think it's important to understand what we mean with that. So they're generally speaking 4 categories. The one is the total number of matches a professional player plays throughout the season. So we see some people at the top end of the game, and I think here you see the image of Vinicius from our latest player workload monitoring. They play, this is now 1.5 seasons, right? So it's a longer time period, but we have players who in the time span of a season play more than 70 matches, which is extremely excessive from a player perspective. The second category we would be looking at is back-to-back matches. Back-to-back matches is usually what you define as a match rhythm where you play on the weekend in the league, and then during the week you play international club competitions or national team competitions. And usually from a medical perspective, those matches are played with less than 5 days of rest, and you can very clearly see in medical science that basically if you have less than 5 days of rest to recover from a full match, the risk of injury simply increases. Now, when you go back to the slide of Vinicius, you've seen that he played more than 13 consecutive matches back-to-back in this period at some point, which is massive, because if you think about this rhythm, this means that the player is barely training, right? So he plays really on the Sunday, then he has a recovery day, then usually during the week he plays a match away, which means the player has to travel, it's late kickoff time, it has an effect on his sleep rhythm. So back-to-back matches actually impact on quite a lot of levels. And then there are 2 other aspects actually when it comes to workload. The one is travel, so especially travels, and here we're in Portugal, where we have a lot of players playing in the Portugal's league who also play abroad. So players who play for the national team who have to actually do consecutive and consistent international travel across time zones. This is just further adding to the match schedule. And then last but not least, what we can see through the competition calendar, I think this is also something Javi and Alberto will talk about, we have a overlapping nature of the competition calendar, which means that even collectively agreed rest times and recovery times for players at the end of the season, during the season breaks, which is usually negotiated between the player union and the league, these can't be respected anymore because there's so much pressure on the clubs who play actually late into other competitions or club qualification pathways that actually the minimum rest periods cannot be upheld. So at the moment we have a really difficult calendar from a player perspective on the top end. And again, I think also we see underload for quite a number of players. That's also why we support sort of like the entire investment into other competitions and in smaller leagues to actually provide enough playing time.
Thank you, Alexander. It's a difficult calendar for footballers and also for the clubs and for the leagues. We are going to speak with Alberto Colombo. He's here next to me. He's the Deputy Secretary General of the European Leagues. And he's going to speak about the controversy of the difficult to fix for, in one point, international matches between national team and the football leagues, and also the football leagues between the European competition games like Champions League, Europa League. What can do the leagues to protect their calendars?
So, good afternoon, everybody. That's a good question, because if you start by posing the question, what the league should do to protect the calendar, this means that there is a problem in the calendar, and that the calendar of domestic football is actually under threat or under an attack. But if we look at the calendar of domestic football, especially to the big leagues in Europe, if I remember well, since the creation of the Premier League, they always had 20 clubs. 20 clubs, 38 match days. The same in Spain with LaLiga, and I remember maybe when I was a kid in Italy, that the competition had 16, 18 clubs, whatever, but now it's more than 20, 25 years that the main leagues are playing exactly with the same calendar. So that if there is a problem in the calendar, this has not definitely been created by domestic football. We know and we have experienced during the past years an expansion and an ambition to continuous expansion from both FIFA and UEFA to add new dates when it comes to the international club competitions, but also new dates when it comes to international national teams competition. Introduction of new competition back a few years ago, like the Conference League, the introduction of the National League, the expansion of the calendar. Now, of course, during the past, I will say 2 years, and there is an ongoing discussion as well, we have been definitely in discussion with the stakeholders, mainly UEFA, about the upcoming expansion of the calendar when it comes to international club competition organized by UEFA. I prepared just one slide that I don't see, but I see that is here on the left, for you to notice that we will definitely have some problem in the organization of the calendar, and especially in the split between domestic club football and international club football in Europe. Thanks to the expansion of the new competition format that will happen in 2024, as from this season. First, from a scheduling point of view, there will be 4 additional match weeks. Right now, as you are aware, if we, for example, talk about the Champions League, group stage is played more or less between September and November. Then there is a quite long break in mid-November, the whole December, January, and then the competition starts again in February for the knockout phase. With this new introduction, UEFA will be obliged to schedule matches, 2 match days in December, 2 match days in January. Basically delivering something that is perceived more as a league structure. This where there are no real pause, you know. And first, this is definitely creating an impact on the perception of the football fans and in the way they will consume definitely the product. Not surprisingly, they will create problems to domestic football in the organization of their scheduling. And there is no match. Nowadays, the calendar is so congested that in most of the leagues, there is a problem about a postponement due to heavy rain, snow, whatever, and we have difficulties to find available date in the calendar to schedule these matches. And often, some leagues are more or less obliged to schedule matches on the same days of UEFA club competition. In the upcoming years, it will be most probably unavoidable to experience some matches to be played on similar dates. Let's be clear, nobody wants to organize clashes. It's not in the interest of domestic leagues, it's not in the interest of UEFA that the matches are played on the same days. But the calendar will be more congested than ever. And on top of that, let's have a look on the number of matches, because with the expansion and the new format of competition, actually, the current Champions League, just to make an example of the most important competition, is played during a season with 125 matches. With the upcoming league format, the so-called Swiss format, the new Champions League will have 189 matches. This means 64 matches more. This means 50% more of the matches. So on top of the problem of the scheduling, there's definitely a much bigger product that is going from UEFA on the, let's say, media market, broadcasting market, that on top of creating a problem on the scheduling is definitely potentially create a switch of value between international football and domestic football. So that is definitely that is on top of our table and discussion together with UEFA and our member leagues.
You don't feel, Alberto, that the people and the fans think that always is football in TV? All the time there is football in TV, and can be a problem because in that case the fans can lose the interest if there is matches all the time?
Well, hopefully not. because we want football fans to keep consuming football. But the reality nowadays is that there is football every single day of the week, because leagues are taking and playing from Wednesday to Monday. UEFA is playing Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, not every week, but there will be 4 additional weeks, including exclusively matched weeks for the Conference League, for the Europa League, and the Champions League. So hopefully this will not happen, but a bit of a risk of cannibalization is definitely there.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Alberto. In that way, I was speaking before with Javier Morente, Director of Relations with International Sports Association of LaLiga. We were speaking about the Spanish teams has a lot of Champions League and Europa League games because they arrived to the final stages in the last year. So Alberto spoke about how can they deal the leagues, and concretely La Liga, what can do with this amount of games?
Thank you very much. I'll try to reply to this one, and I'll pick up the question about how about too much football or fans watching too much football. Obviously, the calendar is a key element in football because pretty much everything evolves around the calendar. But the calendar has 3 very different components. So there's the domestic calendar, where leagues, cups, and Super Cup games are played. There is continental calendar, where in Europe, for example, we have the Champions League, Europa League, and Conference League. And then we have the international match calendar, where national teams, when the World Cup is played. And these 3 dimensions, they have somehow to survive together, right? And to me, there are 2 key pillars for the calendar to be successful, which is first, it needs to be understood, and I'll try to pick up about fans watching too much football. First, it needs to be understood. At second, it needs to be protected. Why it needs to be understood? Because there's a tendency for the last months or years to create more elite competitions. And we saw it last year. FIFA in April or March 21 came up with an idea of a biennial World Cup, which we can all agree it's an elite competition that doesn't help anyone. That's why it was rejected. But what we need to understand is that, and I'm going to take La Liga as an example. La Liga or Spain plays a maximum of 46 domestic games. 46. We have 38 games in La Liga, 6 games in the Cup, and 2 games with the Super Cup, 46. But 80% of the clubs do not play 46 games because they don't reach the Super Cup, because they don't reach the finals of the Cup. They play 80% of the clubs play between 40 and 42 games because they play 38 games in La Liga and they play 1, 2, 3 games in the Cup. That's the reality for 80% of the clubs and the vast majority of players. And that's the only competition they play. And then we have, on top of that, 20% of the clubs that are withdrawn from the league to play club competitions, right? So we have, for example, the Champions League. And that's only 20% of the clubs in the biggest leagues, but in the medium and small leagues, obviously that percentage is smaller. And then we have the international match calendar where the best players, for example, the World Cup, the best players that are usually coming from these 20% of the clubs are the ones playing. And the case of Vinicius, it's not representative of the reality of all the players. Vinicius is a 0.1% because he reaches the finals with Real Madrid of the Cup, the Super Cup, the final of Champions League. He will probably perform very well with Brazil in the World Cup. But the reality is that 80% of the clubs, 95% of the players, they play pretty much only domestic competitions. And that's what we need to protect and we need to understand, first of all. And when I talk about protection, which was my second point, what I'm talking about is the following. The turnover of the leagues all around the world per season is 29 billion euros. If you take TV rights, if you take commercial rights, if you take match day ticketing, and hospitality, 29 billion euros. If you compare this to FIFA's revenue, it depends because every year they don't have a World Cup and that creates differences in the revenues. But if you take an average, in the cycle, for example, 15-18, as an average per season, FIFA generated 1.5 billion euros. 29 billion euros, 1.5 billion euros. So the economic power of football is obviously in the domestic leagues. And domestic leagues is where 80% of the clubs and 80 or 85% of the players is the only competition they play. And then we have the very good clubs and the very good players that play additional matches. But whenever we think about changing the calendar, whenever FIFA last year came up with a proposal about more elite competition is not going to help anyone because it's going to overload even more the players, which Alexander is playing very well. Vinicius is playing a lot of matches. So with a World Cup every 2 years, he's going to play even more matches. But the calendar is already saturated. We cannot have more competitions. In order to have more competition, we have to decrease the domestic games. So leagues, for example, LaLiga, Premier League, Italy, we have 20 clubs. The only option is to reduce our clubs from 20 to 18. And who are the clubs that are going to be penalized by this reduction? The ones that do not play European competitions, the ones that their players don't play international matches. So at the end, that kind of proposals, like the one FIFA proposed last year, doesn't help the big players that are already playing a lot of games, and doesn't help the small, medium clubs and players because they are playing just fine. They play weekend after weekend, and that's it. They play between 40 to 42 games domestically. And that's a reality in La Liga, that we have 20 clubs, but there are leagues in Europe and all around the world that they don't even have 20 clubs, they have less clubs. So it's very, very hard for an average club, so for 80% of the clubs, to even reach 45 games. That's very difficult. Most of the clubs play around 40 games. So that's why, as a summary, trying to reply to the question, we need to understand that the base of the calendar is domestic calendar. That's the foundation where everyone plays. And second, the economic difference. The leagues making 29 billion euros and FIFA making 1.5. So whenever we think about calendar, let's put everything into context.
Yeah, and if I may, elaborating on this point, you mentioned, Javier, the number of clubs. I mean, reducing the number of clubs is definitely and will never be a solution because it's absolutely obvious that reducing the number of clubs in a competition is not only about, well, we will play less matches. It's not just an issue for the players where the workload will be not that high. Because those competitions that might feel the pressure to reduce the number of clubs and going and reducing the number of matches, maybe political pressure, actually they are freeing the space for other competition to fill that calendar. So it's not that if you reduce the number of matches, you reduce the number of clubs, that football will not be played. On the long term, there will be other competition, maybe under the umbrella of FIFA and UEFA, they are targeting that free space and free dates. So that is absolutely fundamental. Leagues could change their format. For instance, I could make an example. We have the Swiss League that recently has been approved a change in their format with the introduction of the playoff. Actually, they have been reducing the number of clubs, but they've been increasing the number of matches because they have introduced a playoff formula. So the leagues protecting their dates is fundamental because otherwise, other competition will occupy that space in the calendars, will have a bigger product in the market, and this will also affect, in the long term, the revenues of the league itself.
Thank you, Alberto. And now we are going to fly to Qatar to speak with Ahmed Abbasi, Executive Director of Competition and Football Development of the Qatar Stars League. What is your point of view in a moment that all the European international calendar has changed for the World Cup, which is going to start on Sunday? And what can, for example, Qatar League or other leagues deal to fix this with players, leagues, that before explained Alexander, Alberto, and Javier?
First of all, it's an honor and pleasure for me to be part of this amazing event today and part of this esteemed panel. And I would have wished to be in person in this event, but as you know, after tomorrow starts the big event for my country, and we are hoping to have, we promised the world the amazing, and this is what we will deliver. To respond to your answer, I will wear two hats. The first one is the domestic hat of our league, and the second one is the AFC, the Asian Football Confederation's hat, as an AFC competitions committee member. So, of course, for our league in the past 4 or 5 years, it has been a journey, quite an unusual journey, let's say, on the way to the World Cup. Because, as you know, for the World Cup, it's the first time where you can watch 4 games per day because of the proximity. But as a league, it means for us that most of the facilities, or actually all of our facilities, have to be prepared for the World Cup, which had to mean in the last 4 or 5 years that one, we had to be extremely flexible. We had to know all that we have a goal, and we have to respect the timelines given to prepare the facilities, and therefore we had to be extremely flexible with the calendar itself, but also with the match venues. So it was difficult to have home and away in a strict and normal way, because a lot of stadiums went into renovation at a certain time, and therefore clubs could not use it as a home stadium. And in the middle of that, of course, we had the pandemic, which was for the whole world a big test for its adaptability, and it stretched our capability to be adaptive. And I believe that it was a test for us as a host country to adapt our methods, to adapt our calendars, but also to be able to change and adjust the calendar, the venues in a very short time. The second element that was very important for us in the last couple of years was the alignment of all stakeholders. So when we make a lot of changes, or when we don't have certain venues available for home matches, the players in the first place, but the clubs, the coaches, they were all understanding that this is all our journey together. So within the journey, there is struggle. There's a moment where we have to be patient. We have to be flexible towards the goal of delivering this amazing event. As for the Asian Football Confederation and the calendar in the last year, the year of the World Cup, we've actually seen an opportunity to change the continental club competition, which is the Champions League. So for years we've tried to change the calendar of the Champions League, which used to be from January to December, towards a calendar that starts similar to the European Champions League calendar from August to May. And we've taken this opportunity to take this decision, which is a positive change forward for the Asian Champions League to become maybe a competitor to one day a competitor to the UEFA Champions League.
Thank you, Ahmed. We are going to discuss a little bit about that topic. Ahmed was speaking about changes, about to be flexible. Alexander, I'll start for you, and then I open the conversation to Javier, Alberto, Ahmed, of course. What is the balance in the calendar?
Look, I think maybe if you can also quickly just go to the last slide, to the third slide I brought with me. I think it's really important to understand the negative effect we see currently in the calendar, right, from a player perspective. And I think this has not just to do with an increased injury risk, right, for players and less preparation time. It has to do with the fact that players cannot train anymore. They can't put actually focus in practice on things they want to improve in the game because they're simply playing and traveling. So it's really detrimental actually to the development of the game as well from a player perspective. We can see massive impacts on the lifestyle of players. So when we discussed with the players, for example, the 2-year World Cup proposal, some of the feedback was, look, over my dead body, because I actually don't want to be another 6 weeks away from my family, and I want to have time to spend with my family as well, for example. So they're just natural limits to what the players can endure. The good point in that is obviously, I think, what we can do about the calendar in that. And I think from our perspective, the positive is that a lot of these things we discuss, and we've discussed it with Alberto and with Javi, these are actually labor matters, right? These are things which should be governed in labor relations between the employer and the employees, and I think this is usually what is also be done at domestic level between the player unions and the leagues. And a few weeks ago, we have signed a global labor agreement with the International Labour Organization to actually address essentially also these things in the calendar, and to actually see what things we should also govern at the international level to protect the health and safety of the players. But also to protect the balance between international competitions and domestic competitions, to protect the domestic workplace of the players, to actually avoid these overlapping schedules of some of the new developments with regards to new competitions which are placed in a calendar. And it's really important that we find solutions for that. So when we discussed that with the players, we have also discussed that with the high-performance coaches, which I think is really important as an audience in this context. And there were basically 3-4 key messages which came back from that, and we more or less also agree with the leagues on that. The first one is we need to protect season breaks, right? So in-season breaks or off-season breaks in the calendar, we need to be able to protect them. We can't allow competitions to eat into that, which already limits the room you can actually have to place new competitions such as a 2-year World Cup, for example. Then we definitely need to look at travel times of players, specifically for international players. So at the moment, I think we have 5 international windows for the national teams. We should be looking at how we can reduce that without also making the breaks too long so that they actually disrupt too much the domestic competition calendar. So I think this is something which we have to tackle. And then as a third element, I think we need to look at the back-to-back matches. This is something which we probably need to study a little bit more, but I showed you the example of Vinicius. We think this is too much. The coaches think this is too much. The players think this is too much. So the balance is probably somewhere between 4, 6, or 8 back-to-back matches, and then for the player to have a normal training week, which means not that the player is resting, it's just that the player is playing Saturday, Sunday, and has a normal training week actually, right? It's not a holiday period. But I think we also, when we discuss it with the leagues, we want to study that a little bit more. But for me, the beauty in this is that obviously the way you shape such regulations, you can actually also protect domestic competitions, because you can also ensure how you steer what type of matches players can play, right? So I think this is something which we need to look at, and I think we have enough disagreement also still with Javi and Alberto. I think, for example, that we believe that the actual scope of the players who are affected by overload is maybe slightly bigger. We can see that also in second-tier competitions. So, for example, in the EFL in England, that players play a massive amount of matches, not just because of the league competitions, but also cup competitions domestically, for example. But obviously, I think this is something which affects the players at the top end of the game to the largest degree. And now we need to find a way forward. But what is clear for us in the governance of the game is that I think that the social partners, the leagues, the player unions have a massive role to play, especially internationally on this.
I'll pick up on the governance because at the end of the day, the fact that the football governing body, such as it is FIFA, comes up with disruptive calendar proposals that focuses on 5% of the players that do not need more matches and forgets about 95% of the players that are actually playing enough matches because they play weekend after weekend. That the fact that FIFA didn't even consult the leagues on this matter, the fact that FIFA didn't even run an economic assessment, and KPMG did, and KPMG said that that proposal from FIFA would have an impact all over the world in leagues, all around the world, national teams, women's football of 10 billion euros per season. That reality, it's a governance issue. At the end of the day, the reality is that FIFA takes decisions without consulting the leagues and the players. There's no structured dialogue. That's why the leagues represented by World Leagues Forum, the World Association of Leagues, And FIFPro, the Players Union representation, we decided that we need to tackle these issues together, because the reality of Vinicius playing that many matches, it's a reality, but there is also an underload amount of games that is the reality for 90% of the players. So let's tackle both issues, but not losing the perspective about the elite players, because it's true that we watch many games Sundays, Wednesdays, Sundays, Wednesdays, but 80% of the clubs only play Sundays, 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 Sundays. Then we have the Wednesdays are usually played by the big clubs or the big players in elite competitions. Most of the clubs play from weekend to weekend.
Maybe final consideration on the fact that you ask, what we can do to have a more balanced calendar. I mean, I personally believe, and we believe, that the current calendar is quite balanced. There's no surprise that we are defending the status quo when it comes to the split between domestic competition and international cup competition. We would have signed a new format of the competition, but without an expansion of the number of match days, and without an expansion of the number. So, unfortunately, I fully agree with Javier, there is a governance problem, because despite maybe there is a more structured dialogue at European level with UEFA, still there was an imposition of an expansion of the calendar of European Cup competition coming from top, and we were in complete disagreement with this. Luckily, we have been able at least to find a compromise so that the number of matches, at least in Champions League and Conference League, has been increased by 2 and not by 10, as it was the initial proposal. But the current calendar is quite balanced. The problem comes when there is a new competition coming, when there is a competition that all in a sudden is playing winter, when there are new ideas of club competition coming. Not surprisingly, I'm sure that when the World Cup will finish, the idea of the organization of the Club World Cup, we will fly over our desk already in January, February, and this will be a new competition, a refurbished competition under the umbrella of FIFA that will pose additional pressure on the calendar of domestic football.
Thank you, Alberto. And finally, Ahmed, what do you think about that topic, about the balance? Shortly.
Yes, I agree. I agree with my friend from LaLiga that 80% of the players are not concerned with playing too many matches. In our context, it's a little bit different. In our context, we have all of our national team players playing in the domestic league. Those players play in the national team, they play in their clubs, and most of them play in the clubs who play in the Champions League. So they play a significant number of games. However, the other players play a very low number of games. How do we want to balance this in the future? Because now, since all our players play in our domestic league, we have the opportunity to take them for longer camps than it's usually seen with other national teams, especially towards the World Cup, where we did a special program for those players. But in the future, it's really about balancing that calendar and having a good number of matches for all the players. We believe that in the future we have to have more discussions with the players themselves to see how they feel, how they want to play every 3-4 days. Do they want to play once a week? How the injuries are increasing or decreasing. And we're doing a lot of studies with our sports hospital Aspetar to see what the ideal number of matches is for the players in order to prevent those injuries, and also discussions with the coaches. We need in the future to have more leaders that come actually from a football career, because those people can help us together with those who haven't had the chance to have a football career to take decisions that are in favor of the players. And I think that the future needs those kind of leaders. I think the future needs the changes that we see from Arsene Wenger. I think that a lot of things have changed in the last couple of years. because somebody like Arsene Wenger understands the football, understands the pitch, because he has worked for so many years on the pitch. So I believe that we all need definitely to have more discussions, but we need research, and we need those people who are the number one people involved in those changes.
Thank you, Ahmed. Finally, the most important thing is to find a balance to continue enjoying football. That is that everybody wants. Thank you very much to Alberto, Javier, Alexander, and Ahmed, and thank you everybody to attend to that panel. Thanks a lot.
E era como dizia o Jon Prada, continuando disfrutando del fútbol, ¿no? Eso es, lo más importante. Gracias. E protegendo, ao fim e ao cabo, as ligas nacionais acaba por ser aqui o ponto central. Vamos acelerar, porque já estamos um bocadinho também de atraso em relação à hora prevista. Avançamos para o próximo painel e vamos olhar do sonho à realidade, percebendo aqui o caminho do investimento que tem sido feito no futebol, investimento privado que tem vindo a aumentar, e perceber como é que se faz o caminho para o sucesso neste investimento, nesta indústria, que ao fim e ao cabo falamos de uma indústria, mas sempre de olhos postos na valorização de um negócio, sem esquecer, claro, os adeptos. Vamos receber agora o Gianluca Santaniello, que é diretor de negócio do Venezia, de Itália. Vamos receber também a Mariam Mourinho, que é a CEO do grupo